Alright, so we recently got a new update in ALS, and I think out of all the updates ever, this one probably had the craziest units. So today we'll be making a brand new tier list ranking every meta unit in ALS as of the Godly One Punch Man update. Keep in mind these rankings are just my opinion, but I still hope you enjoy the video. If you do, maybe leave a like or subscribe. But anyways, let's get into it. Now for the rankings today, we'll be putting every unit in the following tiers: Meta Overall, Meta Infinite, Meta Early, Support, Decent, and Farms. Now I went ahead and got the farms out of the way because those are pretty straightforward. Idol's gonna make the most amount of cash and she has a buff. Yojin makes some pretty good cash and he's cheap, and then Robin makes good cash but she is pretty expensive. Moving into the actual units, starting with the brand new update ones, we have Tatsumaki. And Tatsumaki I'd say is meta early, but can also function as a support because she has up to an 80% slow with one of her passives. Overall just a cheap heal unit with really good damage and also some pretty good supporting capabilities. And Genos I think is probably meta overall. This guy does some really crazy damage, but his damage is kind of conditional. You want to run him with either units that have burn or Saitama, which we'll talk about in a second. But overall, really solid unit. The One Punch Man. This guy in my opinion is a meta infinite unit. He can do some really good damage and definitely can be okay in progressive, but most of his damage comes from passives that take a while to ramp up. Overall an infinite unit, but really solid. Now Cosmic Garo, this guy has a couple forms, so I'd recommend checking out my video on him if you want detailed explanations for what each of the forms do. But pretty much the Baldi form is a worse version of the actual Baldi, so I'd put him probably right about here in Meta Infinite. And then Cosmic, I think Cosmic can be meta overall because it has more potential with like progressive modes from his Dust Storm passive, and it also has a really good amount of base damage. Now Monster Garo, the evolution before the Godly, I wouldn't recommend going for this guy instead of the Godly, definitely get the Godly first, but this guy can be okay for meta early I think. He's kind of like a replacement to Needle Queen. He costs 1.5k to place. He is not hybrid replacement though. He does have a perfect seal, so he's really good against every element. Moving away from the One Punch Man update, we have Ryuk, and I'd say both the Evo and un-Evo forms are meta infinite units, because they both have a chance to instantly kill enemies on every attack, so very very good. Yoruichi can be really strong, I'd say meta overall. She does some really good damage, probably above Genos even. I have a whole video talking about how strong she can be when comboed with some other units. Kurumi is pretty complicated. I'd recommend you check out my video on her for a showcase of all her different forms, but her DPS form does some really good damage. I'd put her right behind Cosmic Garo. Her buff form is probably the best support in the entire game. It reduces her own damage but buffs her allies by a ton. Then her support form, in my opinion, can be meta infinite because it is a full AoE unit with a chance to insta-kill every 5 attacks, so pretty good. Issei I'd put in decent. He does some pretty okay flat damage, but he has nothing special really going for him, no status effect or anything. Mitsuri can be really good for cancelling regen, I'd put her in decent. She's a full AoE hemorrhage unit with pretty good damage. Lightning Queen I'd say is a support. She's a full AoE conquered unit, not really there for the damage, but she can help slow down enemies. Yor is kinda already getting power crept. Her damage is okay, but she's a ground only unit with the weakened status effect. I'd probably put her in decent and right behind Mitsuri. Yuta does some really solid damage, but that's all he has. Kinda like Osoi, but better damage. He does some really good damage if you pair him with Gojo, because he has like a self-buffing passive thing. But other than that, he's just kinda okay. Rios is also probably in decent tier. She's a full AoE kinda support unit. It buffs Osoi and also has Conquered. Albedo is a support unit. She is going to reduce her own damage and buff her allies, similar to Kurumi, but not as effective. I'll put her right here. Gambietta is a heal unit, and she does some okay damage, definitely meta early, but most of her kit is kind of RNG because she has a passive that'll do a lot of damage, but is only a chance every 45 seconds, so she can be really good. It's just kind of up to your luck. Fubuki is meta overall. I'd say she is one of the best units in the game right now. She does some really crazy damage, she is cheap enough to be an early unit, and overall, really crazy. In my opinion, I'd throw Shion in decent. She can do some pretty good damage, but it takes a while to rack up from her passives. I put her right behind Yuta. Roger right now is really good, but he might be bugged. Pretty much he has a passive that can increase his damage by up to 50% based on pirates in his range. But right now it seems to work with units that aren't pirates, so with that in mind, he is really good. But if that were to get fixed, he wouldn't be as high on this list, but for now, top of decent. Shahein is a meta early unit, probably right behind Bambietta. She can be really good. She's a crit unit, and crit is very strong in this game. Sung Jin-woo is probably one of the strongest godlies in the game, definitely going to top of meta overall. In my opinion, probably the second best godly. We'll get into another one soon. Usopp is probably meta overall. He is a very good boss killer. He does a lot of DPS but can only target one unit at a time, or one enemy at a time. So, really good for boss killing. Sanji is probably meta overall as well. He's really good because he can buff the burn damage that enemies take, but he also does some really good full AoE damage. The first Gear 4 Luffy, the first evolution of Luffy, he's an okay support, full AoE conquered, kind of like Lightning Queen. I would say that Armin is meta early. He's ground only on placement, but he does have Weakened, and Weakened is very good for his cheap placement cost. So I'd put him probably right here in meta early. Kaido is one of the strongest units in the game for all content. He has some very strong passives, very strong damage, really strong ability. Everything is going for Kaido. He's really good. Luffy is probably the best godly in the game, right in front of Sung Jin-woo. This guy has a very strong nuke for infinites, and also most of his upgrades are going to be his full AoE attack, and also has Conquered and Hybrid on placement. Overall, it's really good. I don't know if I explained Sung Jin-woo too much, but he's mostly for progressive, Sung Jin-woo is. He has very strong passives and also some summons behind him that also do extra damage. Power can be okay if you pair her with units that also do bleed, because she does extra damage to bleeding type status effect enemies, but overall her damage is kind of getting power crept. Reiner also kind of getting power crept in damage, and all he really has is damage, so towards the bottom of decent. I personally think that Zoro is meta overall. He is pretty cheap and does some really good damage. I'd put him probably right about here. Subaru is a support unit that buffs his teammates, and I'd put him probably right about here. He's very cheap. Erwin is also a support that buffs his teammates, and probably right about here. Beast Rohan is very good for damage, kind of. He is kind of getting power crept, I don't know. If you keep him by himself, his damage is really good, but without being alone, his damage goes down significantly. Antares is a niche buffer. He has like a 10% buff to fire units in his range. Overall, not too good. Aaron really doesn't have much going for him. His damage kind of got power crept, and he's a cheap hemorrhage option, I guess, but overall going in decent. Probably right here. Aizen, I'd say, is meta overall. He's a full AoE unit with really good damage and also the pressure status effect. Kisuke can do really good damage. I think he has bleed and hemorrhage. He's really good for the current tournament, but I'd put him in support overall because he has a special unique barrier thing, which is kind of like a support ability, and he'd go right about here. Guts is going to go in decent. He's a full AoE regen canceller with having bleed and hemorrhage, but his damage is getting kind of power crept. Put him right about here. Ice Mage is going in meta early. On placement, he is pretty cheap, full AoE, hybrid, blizzard, and then he also does extra damage to dark enemies, so he functions as kind of like a dual element. I'd put him probably right behind Shahein. Remy is also meta early. He's very cheap for good hybrid damage, and he also has the random status effect, which is very useful. Put him probably right here. Yamamoto is getting pretty old, if you can tell from his picture. He is full AoE and has a lot of range, but his single target damage is really bad. I'll throw him in decent. Might Guy is also going in decent. He has a lot of raw damage, but that's all he has going for him. Giorno is meta overall. He's cheap enough to be a starter and does some really crazy damage, and even holds up in infinites because of his rewind and percentage-based damage. Ainz is also going in meta overall. This guy is really crazy for AoE DPS and has a very solid nuke. Wukong. This one makes me pretty sad, but he's going in decent. You can use him in some cases for his godly lead, but his damage is getting outdated. And I'd say the same thing for Pride, so I'm going to move him at the same time. I really hope their godly rework saves these guys because they're getting really power crept in terms of damage, and their godly leads can be okay, but their damage is just so outdated at this point compared to other godlies. Bogata is a meta infinite unit. He is very good for his nuke. Flash is a cheap unit that can do good damage with crit builds. I'd put him probably right here in decent. Madara is a meta infinite unit for sure. He has a rewind, a nuke, and some overall pretty solid damage. Naruto is a buffer. He has a range and damage buff, 2 units in his range, and I'd probably put him right about here. Sasuke is pretty cheap, and his damage is getting a little bit outdated. I'll throw him here. Nidoqueen, she can be a good starter for Perfect Seal, but I think she got kind of power crept by Monster Garo. Julius is a support with, I think, a time stop and a stun passive, full AoE as well, so pretty good. I'll throw him right here. Toto is another support. I'd put him probably right behind Albedo, and Law is the same thing. They both just have a very good rewind ability. Jiren is a meta early unit. He is full AoE and hybrid on placement, but you need to keep him alone, otherwise his damage gets pretty low. He's kind of getting outdated, but meta early still. Verona is a support that is going to stun and slow enemies that enter her range. Overall, not very good. Fear is another support with a better version of Fear and full AoE, pretty good. Goku Black is kind of an early unit. He's perfect sealed like Nidoqueen and Monster Garo, but his damage isn't as high. Kind of getting power crept. He's pretty cheap though. I'd probably put him in decent right about here. Kenpachi can be very good as an early unit. I'd say probably better than Jiren. Well, it depends on the situation. He's not full AoE, but he does better fire damage than Jiren, so I'd put him right here. Pucci is probably a meta infinite unit. He has a very good rewind and cooldown resetting ability, and he's also full AoE with pressure. Put him right here. Gojo is a support unit with a bubble that is going to slow down enemies in his range, and he also has a time stop and a nuke. I'll put him probably right behind Law. His damage is getting outdated, but he is a good support. Rimuru is a meta infinite unit. He has an execute for enemies below 15% health. It is going to insta-kill them, and it is very good. I'd put her probably right about here. Rengoku, there are better options for fire starters with Kenpachi and Jiren, so I'll throw him in decent, and probably pretty low in decent, like right here honestly, bottom of decent. Rukia is full AoE with freeze. She can be a decent support, but her damage is kind of getting outdated. I'll probably throw her right here. Ichigo is a meta early unit for his buff mostly. His damage is kind of getting outdated, and his godly lead is awful. I'll probably put him right here. Goku, another godly, sadly getting power crept. He can be a support for his bubble that is going to slow down enemies and make them take more damage, but overall his damage is getting power crept. Not very good anymore. Sukuna can be great for his lead, especially in infinites. I'd say a meta infinite unit. He has a couple nukes that do a pretty good amount of damage, but mostly his lead is going to be huge for buffing your supports and stuff like that. Dio, I would say, is at the bottom of meta infinite. You can use him for his time stop, but he kind of got power crept entirely by Karumi, who has a 90-second time stop, while his is a 60-second, so he's not very good anymore. Zamasu can be good for infinite, I think. He has a nuke, he's full AoE, he has pretty good damage and a buff. Put him probably right here. Saber, I would say, is indecent. She's a damage unit that is kind of getting power crept. I'd put her probably right about here. Gilgamesh, I'd say, is meta infinite. He has a 75 billion damage nuke that also has a 25% auto execute. Very good for infinite runs, right above Rimuru. And finally, we have Archer, who did recently get buffed not too long ago, but his damage is still kind of mid. He's getting power crept already, and all he has going for him is damage. I think we have the final rankings. Feel free to let me know what you think in the comments down below. Of course, this is just my opinion and based on my research, and there are things that could be improved, but I still hope the video helps you. Anyways, thank you to my channel members for making this video possible. You guys are the best. But thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Hope to see you in the next one. And have a great day.